Well, hello, everyone. I'm Gloria Blackwell, AAUW's Chief Executive Officer, and welcome to our webinar featuring Dr. Keisha Blain. We're so happy that you can join us this afternoon, or maybe it's morning where you are, for a conversation that's actually going to close out AAUW's 140th anniversary celebration. During that time, we've had a number of webinars featuring our amazing fellowships and grants alumni, and we're so excited to have Dr. Blain with us here this afternoon. So let's get started with today's event. I'm very, very pleased to introduce American Fellowships alumna and full professor of Africana Studies and History at Brown University, Dr. Keisha Blain. She is also a 2022 Guggenheim Fellow and Class of 2022 Carnegie Fellow. Dr. Blain is an award-winning historian and writer with broad interests in 20th century U.S. African American history, the modern African diaspora, and women's and gender studies. In addition, Dr. Blain is a columnist for MSNBC, covering race, gender, and politics in historical and contemporary perspectives, and she's also past president of the African American Intellectual History Society from 2017 until 2021. Dr. Blain is the author of several books, including Set the World on Fire, Black Nationalist Women and the Global Struggle for Freedom, another great book, published by the University of Pennsylvania Press in 2018, and winner of the 2018 First Book Award from the Berkshire Conference of Women Historians. She also received the 2019 Darlene Clark Hine Award from the Organization of American Historians and was selected as a finalist for several other prestigious prizes and awards. She's also published 4 edited volumes. The most recent, with co-editor Ibram Kendi, is the #1 New York Times bestseller, 400 Souls, A Community History of African America, 1619 to 2019. Now, obviously, there's so much more that I could tell you about Dr. Blain's impressive career, but we'll drop a link to her bio in the chat so that we can get started with our discussion today. Until I Am Free, Fannie Lou Hamer's enduring message to America was published by Beacon Press in 2021, nominated for an NAACP Image Award, selected as a finalist for the 2022 National Book Critics Circle Award, and selected as one of the best history books by Smithsonian Magazine in 2021. The book has been widely featured in popular outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and The Guardian. Until I Am Free is a blend of social commentary, biography, and intellectual history. It's a manifesto for anyone committed to social justice, and it challenges us to listen to a working poor and disabled Black woman activist and intellectual of the civil rights movement as we grapple with contemporary concerns around race, inequality, and social justice. So welcome, Dr. Blain, and let's get started.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We are so excited that you are here with us. So obviously, the first question that I want to hear about is, we're so proud to have you as an AAUW American Fellowships alumna, and you were awarded a fellowship. And can you talk about how that award impacted your research and your studies during that time?
Yes. I was just reflecting on how meaningful the award was and still is, because I was, at the time I received the award, I was doing my first year on my first tenure track position. Essentially, I had completed my PhD in 2014 and had completed a postdoctoral fellowship and then jumped right into the tenure track. That year, I will admit I had a very difficult year. So on a personal level, I was struggling with my new job. I simply hated it, to be honest with you. It's not to disparage an institution or anything, but it's simply, sometimes you find yourself in great places that simply do not work for you for whatever reason. And I did not really. I don't think I don't think it was a good fit, essentially. But you don't often figure that out until you're in the position. And so I remember being in that first year on the tenure track, feeling down for lots of reasons, and struggling with the writing, knowing that I just needed time because I was busy teaching, I was doing service, and I had received feedback on my manuscript. It was under contract, but I just needed time to actually sit down to make the revisions. And I felt like I needed to get away from the place, from the space, for my own peace of mind. And I applied for the fellowship. And I'll admit, I didn't think I would get the fellowship, but I knew that it was so competitive, very hard to get the fellowship. And I felt like it was a long shot, but I applied nonetheless. And when I found out that I won the fellowship, I was in tears, because it wasn't just that I had the funding to take a leave to finish the book, but it was that I could get out of the place where I was. So it's interesting that it helped to me in terms of my research and writing, but quite frankly, on an emotional, on a personal level, it was the opportunity that I was looking for to get away. And so I moved closer to family, and that's where I finished the book. I revised the manuscript, which is now Set the World on Fire. And so I credit AAUW. I would not have been able to finish that first book, but quite frankly, I don't think I would have been in the right place emotionally. And having that fellowship helped me get on track. I was able to secure a new position that actually was a better fit for me. And since then, my career has taken off in all kinds of ways. So I want to thank all of you for providing us support. And it's not just the funding, which is amazing, but it's also the community. I have found a remarkable community in AAUW, and a supportive one that I continue to be proud to be a part of to this day.
I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing. You thought, obviously it's a competitive fellowship, and there may have been a bit of trepidation about applying, but I can assure you that AAUW has certainly been gratified, to have you as a part of the AAUW family. And we hear a lot that when people get a fellowship, it comes at a time that is the right time in their lives. And even though they may not have planned it that way, ultimately it turns out to be, during a time when they really needed it the most. So I'm really happy to hear that the fellowship came during it, just at a time when you needed it. And it not only gave you the funding, but it gave you the space that you needed to move forward and to really take care of yourself and make some decisions about your future. That's really, really wonderful. And of course, the result of it, was that amazing first book. So I'm sure that everyone who is a part of AAUW is certainly happy to hear the impact that the fellowship had on you. So let's set the stage. If you can set the stage for us now about the subject of our conversation, right? So for those who are participating who may not know, who was Fannie Lou Hamer, and why did you decide to write this specific book with the specific framing that you used?
Yes, well, there's so much I could say about Fannie Lou Hamer. She was a civil rights activist, even more importantly, a human rights activist, someone who really worked throughout her lifetime to help improve the conditions of other people, and the social conditions, the economic conditions of everyone around her. Hamer was born in Mississippi in 1917. She was born into a sharecropping family, the youngest of 20 children. She had a sixth grade education. And I mention these things because oftentimes when we talk about leaders, we don't often have an expansive vision of leadership, but just to say that we, and I say we as a society, tend to focus on particular groups of individuals, whether we're talking about men, whether we're talking about those who are of the middle class and elite, And Hamer didn't fit those, she didn't fit the mold, so to speak, of what many people would think about as a civil rights leader. And yet she was a remarkable leader. She used her voice, at just a gifted speaker, and she used every single thing she had. And of course, she had limited material resources, but she used those resources to improve the lives of others around her. And I talk about her in the book as someone who played a pivotal role in expanding Black political rights in the United States. And in particular, she played a key role. Her efforts led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, which is so significant in U.S. history. Not surprisingly, that is why it continues to be under attack, because it is one of the most significant pieces of legislation. And of course, within the context of the civil rights movement, one of the things that we emphasize as evidence of success, despite the challenges that we're still facing. So Hamer is very much tied to that story. And of course, I'll say a lot more about her as we continue to discuss, but I think her story is an important one. It's a reminder that leaders come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. And it's a reminder that ordinary people, those with limited formal education, those with limited material resources, can in fact play a crucial role in shaping our society. And I hope that people are inspired by her story.
Absolutely. I appreciate the framing around her as someone who didn't fit into the traditional box of leadership. Right. Because that's still a challenge that we have today about who's a leader, who's perceived as a leader, and who can be elevated to a position of leadership. And also women across the spectrum, seeing themselves as leaders, no matter what their roles are. And so, knowing that she probably, even amongst the civil rights leaders, based even on her background or how she grew up, right, would not have, been in that traditional circle or that traditional sphere, but managed, to have the strength to actually become an icon and a leader is quite remarkable. And I appreciate you also mentioning, the Voting Rights Act, because, here we are on the cusp of the midterm elections, and what we have found since 2020, right, has been this barrage of laws at the state level that are doing so much, right, to infringe upon the rights that Americans have to vote freely. And, that is certainly, one of the foundations of what Fannie Lou Hamer brought to our country. So that's really, really important. So while you were researching the book, I'm sure that it probably could have been, multi-volumes, and there was so much that you found. What was the most interesting discovery that you made while you were, digging through the troves of archives that were available to you or conducting interviews?
Mm-hmm. There's so many things that stand out to me. One is Hamer's humility. And I emphasize this because we often talk about Hamer and other Black women leaders. We talk about how fierce they are, how confident they are. And Hamer was all of those things. But I was deeply moved by just the way she maintained a sense of humility. And what do I mean by that? Well, as I explain in the book, when Hamer joined the movement, she was much older than many of the activists with whom she would collaborate. So at the age of 44, she joins the civil rights movement. She comes into the movement through the efforts of activists in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. And most of these folks are young. They're college students, young college students. At the time, Hamer comes into this space, and she's immediately, when she becomes a field secretary, she's the oldest field secretary at the time. What's interesting about it is, despite the age, the clear difference in terms of age, she comes to the movement in this very humble posture, which is to say that she knows that she of course she has lots of great ideas. She is talented. I mentioned her being a gifted speaker, which she absolutely was. But she knew that she had a lot to learn. At the basic level, she said that she did not know about her right to vote as a citizen of the United States until joining the movement, until attending a mass meeting. And of course, scholars have sometimes debated whether or not that is true in the sense of accuracy, because lots of people will question, well, how is it that she didn't know that she had the right to vote as a citizen of the United States? And as I explain in the book, it's actually not that unreasonable to imagine that Hamer would not have been aware, given lots of circumstances. Especially, we have to remind ourselves we're discussing a particular period in U.S. history in which there were all of these efforts to restrict African Americans from the ballot box. And Hamer, at the time, working as a sharecropper in the state of Mississippi, lots of unique challenges, as of course, lots of challenges that mirror other parts of the South. But as Hamer often emphasized, Mississippi, she described Mississippi as the home of the tree and the land of the grave, just to emphasize how much white supremacist violence shaped Black life in the state. And so Hamer comes into this mass meeting for the first time. She learns about her right to vote as a citizen, and she's learning a lot of other things. And she's open to learning from the younger activists. She takes them seriously, and they take her seriously as a thinker, as a strategist. And it's a really wonderful thing, because for me, I marvel at that, especially because much of the interactions that I know I have witnessed, and I suspect this is true for many people in the contemporary moment when it comes to civil rights activism, today, we often see these generational divides. We see older activists, and not always, but often, being very critical of younger activists. We certainly saw that in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement. We saw older activists denouncing the strategies or even at times the ideas, seeing the ideas as too radical of younger activists in the movement. And Hamer was someone who did not take that approach. Even if she disagreed with younger activists in the movement, she never denounced them. She worked with them. She respected them. And she just had this sense that she had a lot to offer, but also she was open to learning from others. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I would argue it's really a model for leadership in today's context, because if we come to the table, yes, with the confidence, with all the skills and abilities, but with the humility, I think we can really work together in interesting ways if everyone has a sense that they could learn something from the other person in the room. So I marveled at that. And it's one of the traits about Hamer that I find really exciting to study.
Thank you. And I think that's really interesting because these days as well, we hear a lot about generational divides. We hear, so much about how everyone is put in different categories, from the boomers to the millennials to the Gen X's and Y's and Z's, and that there are very specific traits that are sort of put upon these different groups. And, there's less talk about how there are so many similarities or how people can be working together, as opposed to, wanting to keep highlighting the differences in the generations. And so, for someone, of her age to admit that she didn't know it all and that she had, basically a growth mindset, as we would say today, was quite profound. So I can see, why that definitely sparked your interest and admiration as well. And there are certainly lessons to be learned from the relationships that she developed with those who were already sort of fully ingrained within the civil rights structure. And so just this is a little bit of a side one, but when I think about you writing the book, were there other Black women who inspired you? Black women writers who, you look upon as, someone who gave you that inspiration, to move your writing forward?
Yes, so many, but one that I would emphasize, especially in the context of Hamer, is another historian by the name of Chana Lee. I mention her because the first time I ever learned about Fannie Lou Hamer was actually reading Lee's biography of Hamer, and that's called For Freedom's Sake. It's a remarkable book. And I have to say, just as a side, what often happens in the academy, especially, is that we get into these, I think, strange. I do think it's strange. This sort of approach that everyone has to pick a topic, and you can't write about a topic that someone else has written about. What I find interesting is this is particularly true, at least the perception is when it comes to writing about Black people. So we can have 16,000 books on Abraham Lincoln, and you can still go to an editor today and pitch a book on Abraham Lincoln, and no one's going to say to you, well, there are thousands of books on Abraham Lincoln. They're going to say, well, what do you have to offer? What's new in your approach, or what question you're asking? There's a sense that he is so important that we can write books and books and books, and there's really no end in sight, and that is true. And I say that as someone who just read a book on Abraham Lincoln that literally just came out a few weeks ago. And I think it's an important contribution. But my point is, I was always surprised that within the academy, sometimes when we say, well, I want to write about a particular person, someone will say, well, someone else has written about this person. Needless to say, I believe I had something new to say. And I had an original approach to grappling with Hamer's ideas. So I'm glad I moved forward. And one of the first things that I did was reach out to Chana Lee, who's written this remarkable biography, many years before. And I asked she'd be willing to read my work, to give me feedback. And she, without even knowing me, we have actually never met in person, she said, yes, of course. And read my chapters, sent me detailed feedback, was so supportive. I would ask questions, all kinds of questions in the process of doing research. And that to me was so remarkable, because here was a person whose work I admired, whose book I just loved reading as a student. And who then years later would end up extending a hand of support to me. And that really touches me, and I think is representative of the best kind of scholarship, right? When you do the work and you recognize that it's bigger than yourself, right? And that you are willing to help others, advance the work in interesting ways. So I want to give her recognition in this space and thank her for her support. I love her as a scholar, as a writer. I love her work. And so it's wonderful to have a chance to be in dialogue with her.
That's great. I love to hear the story of collaboration and the story of sisterhood, right? And someone who was willing to help give you a leg up so that your voice could be heard, and that your interpretation could get out there, because you're right. People are consistently writing about individuals that you're wondering, how in the world, can there be another book about Elvis or whatever, right? But there are too many books. If there are three, it's too many about someone like Fannie Lou Hamer. So I'm really glad that you found someone who didn't feel threatened, right? Mm-hmm. Who was willing to support another African American scholar. That's wonderful. So when we think about the book and the research that you did, what myths do you hope your book will dispel? Or sort of what do you hope it will help readers to unlearn? Because people also have some very very specific sometimes opinions and experiences about what they have learned about the civil rights movement, or even about the individuals like Fannie Lou Hamer specifically. So what do you hope will be dispelled by the book, and that, folks can walk away, with a new perspective on that piece of knowledge.
Well, one thing that I would emphasize is this idea that we don't have to start from scratch, right? And I've been thinking a lot about this over the last couple of years. It's one of the reasons why I wrote the book in the first place, because I think when it comes to social and political movements, there's often a sense that in order to affect change, we have to come up with something new. And I'm not suggesting that we can't be creative and it's fine to come up with new strategies and tactics. But I often reflect on the fact that so many freedom fighters before us worked to make this moment possible. And granted, I am not oblivious to the challenges that we're facing currently. And there's just so much to address in American society, certainly on a global scale. We have to acknowledge that, but we also have to acknowledge that the circumstances today are not the same. Yes, are there similarities? Sure, but not the same. One of the reasons that I think, as at least on a national level, we've been able to witness the defeat of Jim Crow as an institution, and is because of the strategies, right, of individuals like Fannie Lou Hamer collaborating with so many others who worked to overturn the system. And so part of what I wanted to do is I wanted to remind people that we don't have to start from scratch. Okay, so we understand that we're dealing with the challenges of, for example, police violence. I was thinking about this, especially in the context of, the killing of George Floyd, that all of us witnessed essentially in our television screens over and over again. Just the painful experience of seeing that take place, and the aftermath, and the way that the killing of George Floyd, but also Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and so many others galvanized, I think, activists across the nation as well as across the globe. And part of what people were trying to do is figure out, how do we affect change, right? What do we need to do to actually build this inclusive democracy that at least most of us, I would say many of us, want to see become a reality. How do we get there? And for me, the answer was looking back in order to look forward. And so Hamer was a voice that I felt needed to be elevated in the moment. She had a lot to say about police violence. She had a lot to say about state-sanctioned violence in general, medical violence, which she experienced. She had a lot to say about economic inequality, and the list goes on. She was very attentive to all of these challenges in her lifetime, and some of the same challenges we're dealing with today. And part of it was getting people to go back to her, to carefully think with Hamer in a way, to engage her the same way we would engage Martin Luther King Jr., right? We talk about Martin Luther King Jr., and most people at this point know who he is. And of course, not as many people know who Fannie Lou Hamer is. I think by now things are changing, which I'm thrilled to see. But she hasn't been a household name, right? The way that King has and others in the movement. And so looking back to look forward, thinking, what can we take from Fannie Lou Hamer? What can we take? What lessons can we learn? And one of those lessons that I emphasize in the book is this notion that liberation cannot occur in fragments. And what I mean, there's something about how Hamer approached political activism. It was always about thinking holistically. It was thinking, perhaps in today's context, we will say in intersectional terms, right? To credit Kimberly Crenshaw, to not only talk about race or racism, right, but to understand the overlapping dimensions. So to talk about racism, to talk about classism, to talk about sexism, right, to think about all of these systems or forms of oppression, and to work together to challenge all of them, and to recognize that if one person is hurting, then we're all hurting as a body. So it goes to this notion that she always said, nobody's free until everybody's free. I love that because it's a reminder that we're all in this together, right? And so we can't say, well, I'm concerned about racism and sexism, but I don't really want to talk about homophobia, right? I don't really want to talk about transphobia, or I don't really want to talk about, ableism. I don't want to engage. Well, you can't have that approach because liberation cannot occur in fragments. It is about recognizing that all of these problems need to be addressed. And that's what's so powerful about Hamer. Her hands were in everything. It almost felt that way. But it was intentional. It was getting people to see, yes, voting rights absolutely matters, but you can't just focus on that. You also have to deal with making sure people have food on their tables. So she was thinking about ways to combat poverty. In Mississippi and across the nation. She was thinking about women's rights too. And she was thinking about all these other things. And so I think her story, her life is really important for us to reflect on in this moment, especially to look back in order to look forward.
Yeah, and that's so profound because also the connectivity that you just described, it's not about this one issue that's sitting over here by itself. It's really about how it connects to the other pieces. And one of the things that I found just in learning more about her is this conversation that sometimes happens around people saying, well, all of that was such a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't a long time ago. And not making those linkages between, sort of the struggle, the enduring and ongoing struggle is not something that just happened, within a span of 5 or 10 years. We're still talking about this on a regular basis. And, for people to understand the linkages and how it is connected to history, and also how so much of it, it's not by chance, right? This is intentional. The way in which these things came about were intentional. And, I think that understanding the history and the perspective that it provides is really important, and how it can inform the liberation work that is happening today is really key. So I'm really glad that you lifted that up. And so, I think that is an important takeaway that you just spoke about for those who read the book. Are there any other important takeaways that you really want readers to take away and embrace?
Wow, so many. Well, one thing that I discuss in the book, and I just mentioned briefly Breonna Taylor, and one of the chapters of the book, and you've explained this in the beginning. I think for those who may not be familiar, the book is not a traditional biography, and I say traditional in the sense that I don't start with, okay, well, Hamer was born in all these circumstances, and then I go through all the details of her life leading up to her passing. What the book does, I absolutely do focus on her life, and I do tell the story of her biography, but it's a blend of social commentary and intellectual history. I'm really placing her in conversation with other intellectuals of her time and even before her time. And to the point of the social commentary, what I try to do in the book is get us to think critically about how we can really see the connections between Hamer's work and her thinking to the current moment. And so one of the chapters I talk about Breonna Taylor, and I talk specifically about the work of Kate Young. And many people may not know who I'm talking about, but Kate Young is the young activist and writer who actually played a pivotal role in ensuring that all of us would know who Breonna Taylor was. And what Kate Young did was she used social media. She used social media as a tool to raise awareness about the Breonna Taylor case. Through her efforts, the family was able to raise money to help with the legal, expenses, and I go through how one individual has an idea, feels compelled to make a difference, and just uses the tools available to her. At the time, it was Instagram and Twitter. And she uses these mediums, and ultimately it leads to this national movement that in fact makes a difference, right, in so many ways. And I connected that experience to Hamer's story. Why? Because Hamer was someone, as I mentioned earlier, a disabled Black woman, a sharecropper from the South with a sixth grade education. And she did not have, right, lots of material resources, or even she wasn't tapped into all of these networks as so many others were. She didn't even know, one might say, all of the strategies that others did, because they were more involved in the kind of formal political spaces. But she had an idea. She wanted to make a difference, and she spoke about having this epiphany. When she attended the mass meeting in '62, she talks about it as this religious, both political and religious awakening, where she feels strongly that it's God's will for her to join the movement, that she realizes that her life's purpose is to help work to set others free. And she jumps right into it. She devotes her life to it, never really looks back. And what's remarkable to me is how, right, one individual is able to do all of that. And so I think it's important to reflect on those two examples. We often feel like the only way change happens is if we do something big, right? I have to do something big. I have to launch something. I have to come up with this grand idea. And fine, maybe you will do that. Or maybe you will do something that appears small, but actually can make a difference in your community. So use whatever tools you have, right? Is it social media? If that's the tool you have, use it. If you only have the ability to pull together a group of people in your community, then do that. But the idea is to do something and to use whatever you have at your disposal, and to not sit around thinking, well, I can't do anything because I don't have X, Y, and Z. What's great about Hamer's story, which is so similar in thinking through someone like Kate Young, is that you can really make a difference in what seems like a small way, but that can have these large, I think, reverberations, so to speak, into so many other people's lives, simply because you took a step forward. So I hope that this means something to someone. I hope it propels, it encourages someone to do something, and to not wait, don't wait for the fellowship, right? Don't wait for the funding. As much as these things are important, maybe the key is just to start with what you have, and see where that leads.
Her story is certainly inspiring enough, but everything that you just said is incredibly inspiring, because you're right, particularly when people see, those who have a very large platform, who can affect change, and others don't know where to start. And you're right, you can start right within your own community, having an impact in your own way. Because, right, if everyone waited until they had 500,000, IG followers, or, multi-year grants, where could the change actually happen? And so, one step at a time, whether it's a small step or a big step, is really important. And, you brought to mind, when we talk about her, her energy and her passion, it just reminds me of, every time you see a clip of Fannie Lou Hamer speaking, it just is so incredibly moving and inspiring. And it really, to me, it like transfers to you, because it makes you, it really does set you on fire and make you think about, well, how can I have some kind of an impact? I mean, that passion was clearly, it was in her bones, for sure. And I'm glad that, you very thoughtfully can get people thinking about ways that we can all make a difference, big and small, because we are our country and the world. There's certainly, these are challenging times, and any way that we can, figure out in some kind of a way that we can have an impact, I think it can be really powerful. And it doesn't have to be earth shattering, but it really can be something that, even in your own community can make a big difference, can make a really big difference. So thank you. So when we think about, we have a quick question that came in. I want to ask you, a question that came in. It says, so what do you think of Kate Larson's book, Walk With Me, about Fannie Lou Hamer?
So I've only read about 25% of the book, and for no other reason that I've been so busy and trying to keep up with a long reading list. But I'm really thrilled that Kate published the book. And I think it goes back to my point earlier. I just think we have to take these thinkers and activists seriously enough to give them the time, right? And to devote time to studying them. I'm thrilled that Kate wrote the book, and of course could not have predicted that the two of us would end up publishing the book. I think in the same year, but it's a testament, I think, to how remarkable Hamer was as an activist, as a thinker. There's a lot to say about Fannie Lou Hamer, and we both have different approaches in how we talk about Hamer. But what's wonderful is in each case, you really do leave with the sense that Hamer belongs, right? I mean, in the same way that we revere someone like Martin Luther King Jr., right? That Hamer should also be revered in that way, right? That it's just, I think, if nothing else, I hope that this this greater attention to Hamer in this moment will propel people to study her more, to think about her ideas and to take seriously her ideas moving forward. So I absolutely, I even hope that this conversation today will inspire someone listening to write on Hamer. I have to say, in the process of writing my book, I thought, it'd be good to have a book on this or that. There's so many aspects of Hamer's life that we really can dig deep to, and so I'm thrilled that Kate is doing it, and hopefully others will join the Hamer Club, so to speak. I would love to actually get to the place where I can offer a course on Fannie Lou Hamer, and I think we're close, right? I think we're really close, because we have several books now, and to work with. It would be nice to offer 15 weeks of Fannie Lou Hamer.
That would be fantastic. And now you're making me want to enroll and go back to school. But thank you for sharing. I think it's always good when you have the opportunity also to lift up someone else's work, but also thinking about as the interest grows, it really is important to continue to expand the scholarship. And I wanted to ask, just when you were talking earlier about leaders in the civil rights movement, and I'm just wondering if you could mention sort of that challenge that took place where women within the movement did not get the same recognition as men, and if you could just talk about that for a second.
Yes, in fact, I was just thinking about this just this week, because as we're talking about just all of the amazing work being done on the topic of Black women, Black women's history, there's a new documentary that actually comes out tomorrow. And this is it's called The Rebellious Life of Rosa Parks, of Mrs. Rosa Parks. And this is going to be, I think, just an amazing documentary. I have the privilege of being in the documentary, but that's not why it's amazing. It's amazing because it's based on this groundbreaking book by Jean Theo Harris on Rosa Parks. But one of the things that I was thinking about since that I spoke about in the film is the fact that if you look at the March on Washington, the 1963 March on Washington is this pivotal moment in civil rights history, of course, in U.S. history broadly. We talk about this. Of course, much of the discussion is about Martin Luther King Jr. when we talk about the March on Washington. But what a lot of people don't reflect on is really the gender politics that's at play when you look at this particular moment. What was clear was that women were not given a place of prominence. In fact, women were not even given opportunity to speak, with the exception of Daisy Bates, who speaks for just just very briefly, a few minutes. Women were kept off of the program, and they did talk about this, or so you can go back and read, like Dorothy Heights in particular writes about and offers a really scathing critique about this moment and how Black women were sidelined, even though they were advocating, and they were advocating, saying, "Put us on the program, right? Give us an opportunity to speak. We have something important to say." And no surprise, they were facing, others in the movement. They were facing men who really were serious when it came to advocating civil rights. But they were also upholding, right, this patriarchy, and they did not want to give women equal space, right, and that comes to the fore for the March on Washington. As I said, it's not often the thing we talk about, because of course we just want to elevate, the powerful speeches and all of that. But if you look closely, that in and of itself reveals the problem when it comes to the civil rights movement. You have someone like Ella Baker, who's this extraordinary visionary, who in fact is the reason why there was a student nonviolence coordinating committee in the first place. And she talks about the sexism that she faces in the movement. She talks about the challenges that she encountered first working with the NAACP and later in her career trying to collaborate with King and others. I found it was made clear to her that as a woman, she could only do so much. And so she walked out of that space and went on to help inspire students at Shaw University to establish the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So those are just a couple of examples. And all of that comes to the surface when you look at Fannie Lou Hamer and her interactions with men, in particular at the Democratic National Convention in '64. Yes, there are skirmishes about differences in terms of ideology and approaches, but at the heart of the matter is just the fact that some of the men there didn't think that she should have too much of a say in the space as a woman. They wanted her to listen to what they had to say and do what they suggested, and didn't appreciate her approach to say, "No, I'm not here just to do what you say. I have views of my own, and I'm here to represent the state of Mississippi, and I'm going to speak boldly, and I'm not going to be sidelined, and I just won't allow it." And that's part of her power in the moment. But you absolutely see the gender politics, the patriarchy, all of that comes to the surface when you study the civil rights movement in different organizations and just in interactions on a personal, individual level. That becomes quite clear.
That's really important, I think, because so many people actually don't know about the challenges and the position of women in the civil rights movement and the critical roles that they played, and the acknowledgement that always didn't come for how they were instrumental in moving so much of that advocacy forward. So, and they, despite the patriarchy, right, and despite the silencing that was done to so many of them, they did prevail. And often only after the fact, right, do we actually find out about their amazing contributions to the movement, which is really important. And I think that's another reason why it's really important to continue to uplift these leaders, and for people to continue, with the research and getting the message out and letting people know about their contributions. Very important. Happy to hear that you're going to be contributing you contributed to the Rosa Parks documentary. One thing I do find is because AAUW has funded so many amazing historians and scholars like yourself, I find myself watching so many of these kinds of documentaries, and because I've been with AAUW for a little while, and also because I'm a closet lover of history, I can watch a documentary and immediately someone pops up on the screen and I can say, oh, that person was an AAUW fellow. That happened several weeks ago when I was watching the documentary, the 4-part series with Dr. Henry Louis Gates. And I would see these AAUW alumni, popping up on the screen, which really is a testament to how much this organization has done, to really fund those scholars of African American history, of which you are certainly one of the top. I appreciate that. So it's been more than 40 years since Hamer's death. And so we talked about this a bit earlier, but how do you think the ideas of Hamer remain salient for that new generation of activists who are really dedicated and committed to dismantling systems of oppression, not just in our own country, but across the globe?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that actually connects nicely to Ella Baker, and I talk about in the book that Ella Baker was a mentor for Fannie Lou Hamer. So again, I think it's so extraordinary when you study these figures and you realize how there's so much in terms of networks and collaborations, but really just beautiful friendships and relationships, mentorship. All of that is evident. And one of the reasons that Fannie Lou Hamer truly admired Ella Baker was because Ella Baker was the kind of person who believed strongly in this notion of grassroots leadership. She always wanted to tap into the leadership potential of others. She wanted to work with local people, encourage them to do whatever it is they wanted to do to advance their communities. And I say that because she was very much against a different model, which is often coming into a community thinking you have all the answers, you have all the great ideas, and you're just going to tell people what they need to do, as opposed to perhaps one might say a more humble approach of coming in and saying, well, we're here to support. We have some resources to offer. Let us know how we can help. We want to partner with you. And we want to make sure that you do what it is you recognize as the most important things to do because you understand your community more than anyone else, right? And so Fannie Lou Hamer took that particular approach from Ella Baker. It's one of the reasons that she was even involved in the movement in the first place, because they were practicing this notion of developing local leaders. And so Fannie Lou Hamer pushes this idea throughout her life of the importance of tapping into someone's leadership potential, encouraging them, working with them, making sure that you are really thinking carefully about what the community needs are, and that you don't operate from a place where you think you know it all and you have all the answers. And I think about this in today's context. I think about how difficult it is often when it comes to collaboration. It is very easy to walk into spaces and to think, okay, well, I have the answers. Perhaps I'm the expert in the room. I've done all the research. So now I'm going to tell people what it is they need to do. To the contrary, it's about coming in and really partnering with people, really supporting others and letting them shine, right? And that's what Hamer did. And I think in today's context, it's such an important lesson. We certainly do see, so I mentioned, the Black Lives Matter movement. One of the things that they have emphasized is in a similar way that that Ella Baker spoke about leadership. Many of the leaders of the movement would actually say, there is no one leader, right? That we are, and we're not leaderless, but we're leaderful, right? It comes directly from Ella Baker's vision, and that came through the sort of nonviolent coordinating committee. It's about not one or two people having the final say, or one or two people dominating, one or two people always having the mic, but it's more about recognizing how everyone has something to offer. Everyone brings something to the table. That becomes clear at the Democratic National Convention. Just a brief story: when Hamer learns that Martin Luther King Jr. and several others are having a meeting, and they're trying to talk about, whether or not the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party should accept the non-voting seats, essentially, and they're having a meeting to strategize. And Hamer learns about the meeting, and she disrupts it, right? And she comes, and because her attitude is, no, you're not going to have this meeting on the side and make a decision about what we do. We are going to be all involved. And I sort of chuckle because she essentially forces the meeting out into the hallway because there's not enough room. There's not enough space to accommodate everyone in the room. But it's a beautiful moment. It's almost like you don't get to just be the representative. You don't get to speak on behalf of all of us. No, we will do this together, right? We will put our heads together and we will work together to move forward. And that's not easy, but it's really just an importance of this notion of grassroots leadership that moves away from the charismatic leader. And I think this is a particular strategy that in today's context, we could learn a lot from. And I think it's one that will help all of us to be mindful of, to be thinking of how to tap into the potential of others. And so that it's not just about us, but it's about how we can help and work with someone else. And together, right, collectively, we can figure out the strategy. Requires a lot of humility, of course, as I referred to earlier, but I think it's an important lesson.
Excellent advice and examples. And I think it's the perfect note upon which we can close our conversation, and lots of food for thought, because, as we used to say when I was working in international development, it was, nothing about us without us, and, bringing people together into those conversations. So thank you so much, Dr. Blain. We're going to put up a slide so that our participants will know how to contact you, and just making sure that they can get the book if they want to, and they can also check out your website as well. I want to thank you, obviously, for spending your time with us, sharing that amazing insight that you did about the great Fannie Lou Hamer, and hopefully inspiring more folks to go and check out additional works about her. Definitely want to thank the AAUW team behind the scenes for helping to make all this work. We've dropped a couple of links in the chat for sure. It's not just about our fellowships and grants. We have so many other programs with salary negotiation. You can check out our national conference for college women student leaders as well, that we're excited to have back in person in 2023. But we want to let you, Dr. Blain, have the last word before we depart. So the message that you would like to leave us with.
So this is a quote from Fannie Lou Hamer, one of my favorites, in which she said, "You can pray until you faint, but you must essentially," I'm paraphrasing, "if you don't do something, God is not going to put it on your lap." And I always chuckle because it is a statement that she made in the church setting in front of all of these Christians, right, who I'm sure were shocked that she was saying this to them. But it was just a reminder that, yes, you can hope, prayer comes out of a sense of faith to believe that something is possible. And all of that is important. But if you don't actually take a step to do something, then what is the point, right? And it's just a reminder that we play a part in all of this too. So I hope that encourages us to think carefully about what we will do, right? Do something, whatever that might be, to help us all move forward collectively.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for attending this afternoon's webinar. We appreciate it.